Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for June 26, 2023. We're living through a profound crisis, and that can be deeply unsettling. From studying the pressure on John F. Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis, it becomes clear that the hour-to-hour pressure to make the right decisions, to rethink, to look for solutions, puts an incredible amount of pressure on leaders and also tension within the population. There's a hope, a desire that the crisis will resolve itself quickly and return to the status quo ante, that is, return to normal. But it's dangerous to do this, and it avoids addressing those dynamic processes which allowed the crisis to emerge in the first place. Let's just look at a couple of examples. World War I did not start because of the assassination of the Archduke in Serbia. It was a result of more than half a century of manipulations of inter-imperial rivalries, especially behind the British Great Game policy for controlling Eurasia as well as Western Europe. World War II began with the Versailles Treaty right at the end of World War I. The failure to see the roots in British geopolitics, again, the intent to pit Germany and Russia against each other. The Cold War, Churchill, the division of the world into two empires with the idea that this is somehow the way you can have stability through the threat of nuclear annihilation of all the world if the order is not kept. Today we have NATO's war against Russia in Ukraine, which as well as threats to escalate against China. And why is this happening? To defend the idea of a unipolar order, that the City of London and Wall Street can dictate policy to the world, take sovereignty away from nation states and from people, and use regime change, assassinations, and color revolutions to control the process. Now just look at the gleeful coverage in the West, which greeted the report that Prigozhin and his Wagner forces had turned against Putin and were marching on Moscow, and that Putin may be toppled. These are the headlines of all the major press, especially in Britain. Now, when the immediate crisis was resolved in a deal that Prigozhin's going to go to Belarus and the charges will be dropped, the Wagner forces will return to their bases, these same Western analysts, and I use that term loosely, accuse Putin of weakness, of capitulation, of cowardice. It's obvious they would have preferred to have a bloody shootout in the streets of Moscow, which would have thoroughly destabilized Russia. Since this was avoided, spokesmen of the CIA, State Department, and others are saying that Putin is through, that this is a sign of weakness, Russia will soon have to leave Ukraine, and so on. Now remember, these are the same analysts who told you that Saddam has weapons of mass destruction, that Russia blew up its own Nord Stream pipelines, that Russia's running out of ammunition, the sanctions would collapse Russia, and on and on and on. Such fools cannot be trusted. That they dominate the landscape of Western diplomacy, intelligence, and military policy. Their goal was and remains regime change in Russia, not caring at all for the danger of nuclear war, which would result from actions to accomplish that objective. They have no plans to reverse the collapse of the transatlantic economies, nor to respond positively to the initiatives from the global South that are aspiring for economic justice and development, only to continue to stay the course, bullying, using regime change and military deployments to maintain their collapsing unipolar order. Which brings us back to why John F. Kennedy's June 10, 1963 speech was so important, and the importance of revisiting the battle he waged against his military, intelligence, and political opponents in the last months of his life. He concluded from the danger that we faced annihilation of humanity during the Cuban Missile Crisis that there had to be a better way. Diplomacy, negotiation, recognizing the interests of the other, a principle which goes back to the Peace of Westphalia, which provided a certain degree of peace in Europe for over 300 years, that this is the basis for achieving a lasting peace for all men and women, for all countries, for all time. That's why he was such a threat to the ruling establishment, why they had to take him out, cover up his murder, and rewrite the actual history of this period so as to hide the better tradition of American policy that John F. Kennedy represented. And that's why today we have such incredible foolishness from the centers of power in the West that are literally pushing to see how far they can go without provoking an expansion into World War III and a nuclear war. They're playing with your lives, with the future of you, your children, your grandchildren. That's what they're doing. And when they gloat that Putin is finished, Putin is weak, now we can bring him down, what's the intent? To improve the lives of Russians? They don't give a damn for the people of Russia any more than they care for the people of Ukraine or the people of Chicago or Mexico City. Their concern is with their ability to assert their power as a unipolar force, with the idea that that world order of no sovereignty, of top-down banking control, that order will keep them in power. And that's what they're interested in. So John F. Kennedy's June 10th, 1963 speech could have been a turning point in history, away from not only what happened later in Vietnam, but the subsequent 50 years of permanent war. And you think about it, we had after Vietnam, we were almost immediately after that into Afghanistan, where the U.S. played a major role in provoking the Soviet invasion, then sided with the jihadists in Afghanistan against the Soviets, were involved in building up both Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, and then continuing these wars, the wars in the Middle East. Now we have the war in Europe, and it all comes from the same point: refusal to recognize that other nations have security interests as well, and that it were better for the Western powers to recognize those interests and negotiate livable arrangements that are for the mutual benefit of both sides, or of all sides. This is not going to end. This permanent war will not end until power is removed from the hands of these corporate oligarchs who control most governments and most political parties on the planet. That's why we have launched a campaign for an international peace coalition, which not only addresses the security concerns of all nations, but the economic development concerns. And this is where the fight is going to be, because too many people have the view that the solution is to get rid of governments. But in fact, that's the goal of the World Economic Forum and the oligarchs that created it. Their goal is no governments that can assert any power over and above the private interests of an international arrangement of corporate cartels using the power of the United States military and NATO to enforce it. Any other course of discussion is babbling. So that's why we need to have clarity on these issues. And that's why I keep posting Helga Zepp-LaRouche's 10 principles for peace and security, and why it's important that you take the time to listen to John F. Kennedy's June 10th, 1963 speech, and then ask yourself, wouldn't you like a president who could speak like that today? Is there a reason why we shouldn't have that kind of leadership in the United States? And the answer is yes. It's that we've allowed this gang of corrupt oligarchs to control our political system, to control our educational system, to control our military, our courts, and everything else. That's what has to stop. Is it impossible? Well, John Kennedy didn't think it was impossible. He thought it would be hard, or as he said, hard. But he was committed to do that And we owe it to him and all the Americans and all the people in the world who have suffered from these last 60 years because we didn't follow through on that. We owe it to all of them to make sure that we get it right this time. Thanks for joining me. See you again tomorrow. Hello, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Support our independence to produce videos like these. Become a member of the LaRouche organization at thelarouche.org/member. By becoming a member for $25 or more, you'll get special access to the EIR Alert Daily Briefing and Weekly Magazine, which is what I read to stay on top of things.